everyone, and welcome to Indie Business Radio. I'm your host, Donna Maria, and you have arrived at the one place where we empower you to enjoy your life, build your business, and have your way. Today is March the 2nd, 2009. I can't believe it's already March. It seems like just a few weeks ago we were pulling our Christmas tree down. And spring will be here soon, and I'm happy about that, too, because the snow is on the ground here, believe it or not, in Charlotte, North Carolina, and everything has come to a complete halt. But we are going to put all that stuff aside for a while and talk with our guest today. We're going to be talking about overcoming fears. Now, according to statistics released last month by the U.S. Census Bureau, the average number of years of life remaining at age 30 increased about 3 years compared to what it was in 1980. That means that we're living at least an average of 3 years longer than we were back then. These and other things going on in our economy right now mean that baby boomers, typically defined as people born between 1946 and 1964, are living longer and must also face new things they've never had to face before, and sometimes that can be a little bit scary. Our guest today is Jacqueline Wales, and she's going to help us navigate some of the choppy waters. Jacqueline is also known as the Mid-Life Black Belt Millionaire. She's the founder and CEO of Fearless 50s, a company with programs that helps women visualize goals, overcome adversity, develop confident communication skills, and achieve meaningful success. She's the author of The Fearless Factor, and she joins us today from her offices in New York. Welcome, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Donna Maria. It's a pleasure to be here.
For those of you who are listening at indiebusinessradio.com, we welcome you. We're excited that you're here. But if you really want to get in on the action, you can join the live chat by going to indiebeauty.com and clicking on the top link for radio show. It's just that easy, and you'll be taken into the chat where you can talk with us about our topic today. You can also post your questions there, or you can email them to me at info@indiebusinessradio.com. Well, Jacqueline, Fearless Factor, I love that. Now take us a little bit before this book, back in your life a bit, and tell us about how your life evolved to the point where you ended up being the Fearless Factor woman, the Fearless 50s woman, and the Black Belt Mid-Life Millionaire.
Well, it's probably a long story, and we could take the whole hour doing that, but I'll give you the potted version, which was I was raised in a family with an alcoholic father and a great deal of rage and physical violence as well as sexual abuse. And so my early life was really a whole study of what many people would say typical dysfunctional, where I really spent a great deal of my life in fear, hiding from him so that I wouldn't get beaten up. And this was a big issue. My mother had also suffered the abuse from him, but her background was very tragic also in that there was a history of children born outside of marriage which kept getting thrown over from generation to generation. And I wrote about it in my last book, which is called When the Crow Sings. But the whole idea was that the fear in our house was raging. We absolutely were terrified at every single stage. So my life, I grew up with very little self-esteem. I got into drugs. I got into alcohol. I had children before I was ready for them, and I gave my first one up for adoption. And I spent the first 20 years of my life really in a very bad way trying to figure out who I was in the world. And I was always told I wouldn't amount to much. And that message kind of stuck with me for a long, long time. And then when I was in my 20s, I started to get a little handle on it. I gave my daughter up for adoption. I got married. And then I left my first son with my first husband when he was 3.5 because I needed to go off and find myself, which sounds like a very selfish thing to do, but in fact was the healthiest thing that I could have done for me and for him because of the amount of dysfunction that was around at the time. And then in my 30s, I went to California, leaving London behind. By the way, I was born in Scotland, moved to London, went to California, and at the end of that time, I ended up getting married again, having more children. And it was about that time when I realized that if I wanted to have a healthy family, I needed to get healthy. And that meant I had to confront a great deal of my own fears, my own insecurities, and my own sense of self-worth. And And so for the greater part of my 30s and into my 40s, that was a time of great exploration for me, of really having to step up and deal with the stuff. And there was an awful lot of stuff around that needed cleaning up. So it was an end to the drugs, it was an end to the alcohol, and it was the start of really the creative life for me, because in my 40s, I started to look at what did I really want to do when I was a young child. And I wanted to be a writer, and I wanted to be a singer. I wanted to be a creative individual, but I didn't understand that I actually was already a creative individual. I didn't think I had that in me. But by the time I was halfway through my 40s, I had written 2 books, I had recorded a CD, and I had taken up martial arts at the age of 43 because I was watching my kids doing it, and I thought, I've always wanted to do this, so let's give it a go. And so I started on that journey, and by the time I was 49, I took my black belt in karate, actually on my 49th birthday. And then ultimately, as I got into my 50s and looked back over everything that I had achieved, I thought to myself, what is the greatest thing that you want to do for the rest of your life? What do you want to share with the world? And I realized it was all about getting past the fears.
Right.
Because if anybody could do it, I felt if I could do it, anybody could do it.
Well, let's talk about that, too, because your book really, does, put it kind of all out there. And tell us a little bit about the need for the book that you wrote called The Fearless Factor. Why is it? I know you described your background, and congratulations to you for overcoming so many things. But and also building upon that in a broader sense, what have you seen in women that you work with that requires a book like The Fearless Factor in order to be helpful?
Well, I think all of us have fears. There's no question. Fears, doubts, anxieties, it's all part of the fabric of life, if you like. And it's how we show up to it that really makes the fearless part come alive. Because I truly say there's no such thing as being fearless. There's only the choices and decisions we make in order to move beyond the fears. And this is where a lot of people get hung up, because they're not making those choices and decisions. They're choosing to stay in their so-called safety zone or their comfort zone, which is actually discomfort zone. Because I would say the majority of people have stories that they've carried from their past that are determining their future. And I like to say fear is about 2 specific issues. It's about time and it's about thought, because fear is imagination-based. And most of us are caught up in what happened in the past is going to influence what's going to happen in the future. And they forget about the middle part, which is what's happening right now. Because when you examine your life right now, a lot of the fears, if you really can take them out of the context of the past and into the future, you'll find that a lot of them have no validity whatsoever. And in my experience, and especially for women in midlife, there's a lot of holding back. There's a lot of fear of change. There's a lot of that sense of I'm not capable, or I'm too old, or I don't have the right skills. And so what happens is you create this whole, what I call the yada yada radio of your mind, to convince yourself that you can't do whatever it is that you want to do. So there's a lot of holding back that's based on past behavior, past stories, and that I think is part of the reason why we get caught up in this fearfulness. Where really, fear is our lack of trust in ourselves, and most of us have that at some point or another.
I like that you call that the yada yada radio. That's pretty funny. And we all can relate to that. And, we have a lot of indie business owners today that have joined us. And so we come from a variety of different backgrounds, and Jacqueline, a variety of different age groups. But what you just described, the fear of moving forward, the fear of, as you describe in your book, the fear of your own greatness, we can all relate to that when it comes to being indie business owners. So I wonder, when you work with women who have their own businesses, what are some of the things that you see in that regard, and how do you help people overcome those fears of being successful in business and powerful and leading with confidence?
Well, it's an interesting question, Donna Maria, simply because many people want success. But what it takes to get that success is usually a lot of hard work, determination, focus, discipline, and a commitment to the process and the follow-through, of course. And for many independent businesses, there's a lot of that is not kind of falling into place. So when people come to me to talk to me about their businesses, they're generally not sure if they're on the right track, if this is the business that they want to be building. they're not quite sure if they have enough passion in it, or they're having some struggles with the financial issues. This is huge. And, of course, right now in this recession, this is even more important than ever. The whole identity with money and things is where a lot of people get caught up when they're creating their businesses. Either there's not enough, or we waste it, or we use the wrong resources. So it's all about finding direction. And a lot of the time in small business or independent business, when we're working together, is truly about helping people define what it is that they're really looking for. Because many times we think it's a great idea to start our own business, but we don't have a plan in mind. We just have a good idea. And that's where a lot of people get off the rails. And I'm sure you address this in your weekly radio show. You see this again and again, that unless you have a plan and you also have the support and the mentoring to help you get through this, there's a good chance that you're not going to reach the success you're looking for. And
one of the things we do have the radio show to do is to provide that sort of support and mentorship, and we thank you for being here. I want to read a quote from your book that I found especially hard-hitting and so true. It says, when you play small by keeping yourself modest, humble, accommodating, and soft-spoken, you are denying the world your presence. But more importantly, you are living your life from a half-self-life perspective instead of embracing your whole self. Your capacity to be great is confined by your ability to step forward and truly declare who you are without the fear that you will be found to be a fraud. And the reason that stuck out to me is just last week, Jacqueline, I was having a conversation with someone who recently launched her business blog. And she's getting comments on her blog posts, but most of the people who are sending her comments are emailing them to her and not putting them on her blog, so she asked them why. And at least one of them said, well, because I just don't want to be out there like that. And these are other business women.
Yeah, and this is a huge issue. In fact, I just gave a workshop last Saturday, and there was one woman who was sitting in the audience who had a very soft-spoken way. And I said, you're not used to asking for what you want, are you? And she looked at me in surprise and said, how did you know? I said, I can tell from the tone of your voice. Now, I'm a trained singer, so I know how to belt it. I know how to put my voice out there in a big way. But when you talk to women who are used to service, and let's face it, most women are brought into this world with the understanding that they are caretakers because they're mothers, because they're wives, and because the expectation is that if you're female, you're going to take care of other people. So we put ourselves second as opposed to putting ourselves first. And one of the reasons why I started Fearless 50s was my understanding of it is it's my turn and it's your turn to start taking care of yourself. So when you don't show up to life, and I say this with a lot of passion, if you don't show up to life, then you're constantly subjugating yourself to the needs of other people, and therefore not living up to who you truly can be in this world. And the fear associated with that is that I'm going to be rejected, abandoned, shamed, humiliated, or I'm going to lose. And the lose is I'm going to lose the relationships, I'm going to lose my sense of who I am in the world. So I'll just keep a quiet place here, and I won't come forward and let people really know what I'm made of. But women have a hard time accepting their power.
Well, and I have to say, too, Jacqueline, I don't know if I'm speaking for people in the chat room here. We've got quite a few people here. I'm wondering if I am, because I'm a businesswoman. I'm also a mother. I'm also a wife. And I do see myself in the position of a servant in terms of serving my family. I also lead an organization, so I serve my members. And do you think that we have to balance those interests or at least successfully integrate them so that we're not putting aside our position as service providers or servants to our children or whatever, but that we are molding them into the whole so that we are not only providing different services or being servants, but we're also participating in the world in different ways. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And as you're speaking, here's what's coming up for me. There's a difference between service and servant. And we can be of service, and hopefully that's what we're doing right now. We are being of service, and it is with great pleasure and pride that I can do this. But the other side of the coin is that when you're doing something that takes away from you, where we know as women there's an enormous amount of resentment and rage out there because we have felt like we have subserved our own needs. We have become subservient to other people's needs. And you see that particularly in relationships because it gets defined in a certain way. And the definition of what that is may not be sitting perfectly happy with you. I'll give you an example. When my kids were 13 and 15...
Jacqueline, can you hold the example for after our first break? Can you believe?
Sure.
We've already come to the first break. We do want to hear that break. And I want to thank everyone in the chat room here for speaking up and asking some questions. So when we come back, Jacqueline, I'd like for you to share that story. Then I want to get to some of the questions that people are raising here in the chat room. This is Indie Business Radio. I'm your host, Donna Maria. We'll be right back.
Why is everyone listening to GlobalTalkRadio.com? Because it's the future of talk radio. Every day, more and more people are finding Internet radio as not just an alternative media, but as a replacement to traditional AM and FM broadcast stations. Internet radio offers a wider variety of programs, convenient on-demand listening that meets your schedule, and fewer commercial interruptions. And GlobalTalkRadio.com is already leading the way by matching this content with a highly targeted Internet audience. GlobalTalkRadio.com offers its listeners one of the widest programming varieties on the Internet, from business and finance to self-improvement, paranormal, health, literature, romance, politics, and more. There are also opportunities for prospective hosts who would like to host their own weekly or one-time talk shows. Want to learn more? Check us out at www.globaltalkradio.com and see the future of talk radio today.
Welcome back to Indie Business Radio. I'm here this afternoon with our guest, Jacqueline Wales, the author of The Fearless Factor. And before we took our break, Jacqueline was getting ready to share a story with us. Please continue.
Well, I was talking earlier about, how we define our roles in life and setting boundaries and so forth. And around the age of my kids were 13 and 15. I have 4 children altogether, and these were my 2 youngest daughters. I announced to them that I didn't want to be a mommy anymore. And, of course, they looked at me in horror and said, "What do you mean by that?" And I said, well, here's the thing. I've done the carpools. I've done the PTA. I've done all this stuff of showing up and having dinner on the table every night just because that's what's expected. And I'm not doing it anymore. I'm going to do it according to what I feel like. And if it works within my schedule, that's terrific, because you guys are old enough now to be able to figure things out for yourself. And I'm writing a book, so I need the time for me. And I need to stay focused and disciplined with all of this. So it'll be what it'll be. And it was interesting because they kind of took it, but they were maybe a little unhappy about it. A few years later, my now 18-year-old says to me, I remember when you told us that you were not going to be a mommy anymore, and I thought you were not going to be my mommy. I said, that was not at all what was being said, sweetheart. I really meant that I just needed to define who I was by what I was doing, and it wasn't this role anymore. Because, you're always somebody's mother. I mean, you're a mother, Donna Maria, so you know this. You're so-and-so's mother, or you're so-and-so's wife. And who are you?
Right, and it doesn't help when I go to dance class that I only remember my daughter's fellow dancers' moms' names by their daughter's name. It's like Kathy's mom. You're Kathy's mom.
Yes, precisely. Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting message. But I want to share what Jennifer says in the chat room. She says, I have to remind myself that I'm not raising a child. I'm raising a future adult. She needs to learn to look after herself when mommy's working. This has helped her become more independent. And Jennifer says that she is at longhairlovers.com, by the way. And so she is sharing what you've been describing, right, which is really just sort of integrating that being of service to your children while also making sure that you prioritize yourself and what you're working on.
Absolutely. And it was interesting because when I was in my 30s, when I started my therapeutic process, which, as I said, was fairly intense for a number of years, it was the recognition that I was a role model for these girls. At that point, I had a stepdaughter in my life who arrived on my doorstep, a complete stranger at the age of 10, and I had two more girls that I'd given birth to in my 30s, and I had already left two children behind, one being adopted and the other one with his father. And by the way, I have excellent relationships with every single one of my children at this point in time. But at that point, I said, I am a role model. And if I don't get my stuff sorted out, and this is one of the things I talk about in the Fearless Factor, if I don't get my stuff sorted out, these kids are going to inherit the same kind of stuff that I inherited from my mother, that she inherited from her mother, and that I finally wrote about in my book, When the Crow Sings, because that intergenerational stuff is serious, folks, and I really want you to pay attention to that when we change our habits, we are changing the direction of the history of our family, and that is critical. So yes, being a role model, Jennifer, for your children and getting them to be independent, and I love independent kids. Frankly, it's like you're on your own. The youngest is going to college soon, and it's like, don't come back in a hurry. I'm done. So, and that's not to be a negative. It's just simply they're on their own. They've got their own lives to live. And so good example, absolutely.
Yeah, and Regina, Dr. Flower at drflower.com also mentioned, this question, and I'm going to share it. She mentioned it in the chat room. Once I put myself out there, then what? That's a fear that we all experience that at some point, but what are some things that we can do to really overcome that? And by the way, I will say this too. I know Regina personally, and Jacqueline, you probably work with women who fit this description. She's very strong. She's very smart. She's a very organized businesswoman, and yet, like many of us, me included, we feel that sort of fear, even though we spend a lot of time trying to make it look like we don't have it.
It's a fake it till you make it business. Regina, I would just like to say, when we stand up and we declare who we are, and I know I've done the same thing. People look at me and they go, oh, you've done so much and you're so strong and you've done this, that, and the next thing. I can't believe you've got any insecurities. Well, trust me, we all have insecurities. And that business of stepping out and opening your mouth and really declaring who you are. It was last year at a conference when I stood up in a room of 250 people, and the man who was running the conference, I spoke about what was going on and how I felt really that I wasn't living true to who I was. And he said to me, so what's stopping you? And I said, I'm afraid to play big. And he said, why? So I said, well, because I'm afraid that I'm going to get knocked off the pedestal, that people aren't going to believe me, that I'm not going to be taken seriously. And he said, well, that's your belief system. I don't think there's anybody in this room who would subscribe to it. And certainly when I stopped and thought about that for a moment, every single person in my life sees me much better than I see myself, including my husband of now 29 years, who saw me long before I saw myself. And it's really that point of view. If you look around you, and as Donna Maria just said about you, Regina, you are a very strong, powerful woman. So therefore, that's the persona you're giving, and that's truly who you are. And that's something that we all have to acknowledge and allow for, because we're not going to get knocked off the pedestal. We're not going to be rejected because we're too strong. There's no such thing as being too strong.
And if we are, it's somebody else's problem, right?
Well, that's the other point, and that's a very good point that you just made, which is it is somebody else's problem. And I'm constantly coaching my clients on that when it's, well, what about, the effect on bum? And I'm like, this is not your business. Your only business is to make sure that you yourself are living from the most authentic place that you can be. Being who you want to be in this world, because that's when you bring the magic. That's when you bring the gift of yourself to the rest of the world. In the kind of work that I do, I figure if I can help change one person's life, then it's a domino effect. It goes on to change the lives of others. And when we raise our children as well as we can, and let's face it, there's no perfect way. We're good enough, and I learned about that a long time ago as well. When you can be good enough in everything that you do, that is your power and your strength right there. But
yeah,
that's driving yourself crazy.
Yeah. When I finished law school, I remember, sort of going out into the world, and when I was surrounded by fellow lawyers, I felt like I was in my element. But when I went any place where there might be people who weren't attorneys, and we were in a networking situation or a cocktail party or whatever, and of course the first question is always what you do, people noticed, and I didn't even notice this until one of my friends pointed it out to me, that I never said I was an attorney. I always would say where I worked. I work at so-and-so in the such-and-such an office. And I would not say that. And as I thought about that, this was many years ago, I began to realize that the reason I wasn't sharing that is because I didn't want anybody to feel like I thought I was, the bee's knees, or I was full of myself or something like that. And that's such an unjustified feeling. And I don't know where it came from. Of course, I do now, but at the time, I was just mystified by it. And that's what you described earlier, isn't it, Jacqueline, about how we are sort of intentionally or unintentionally conditioned to sort of feel that reaching a level of success, achieving a goal that is spectacular, which finishing law school is somehow offensive to other people, or will make other people feel a certain way when it's not even your problem.
Well, again, it comes back to the conditioning. And, when you think about it, boys and men are raised to assume that they're going to be successful in the world. They're going to be the breadwinners. They're going to be the ones who rise to the top of the totem poles. And for my generation, we didn't get those messages. We were told we were going to be a great wife, we were going to be a great mother, we did all of that. And I was a stay-at-home mom for years. I didn't have a corporate background. I've never worked in corporate. But the brief times that I did, I couldn't wait to get out of it because I'm the wrong personality type for it. So, we get driven into alleyways, if you like, that are not really who we are. And I think that's very much a part of that, of, learning how to stand up and say, yes, this is what I am. When I first started writing, for instance, I was told by my first writing teachers that I had some talent, and they were quite surprised that I had never written anything before. But I couldn't come out and say to people, I'm a writer. It was impossible because I had never been published. And many writers who are under that misinterpretation also, that you can't call yourself a writer because you're not published. And again, it's that mythology that's created. So standing up and saying, yes, I'm a motivational speaker. That took me a while too, simply because when I started Fearless 50s, all I was starting with was my life history. And I had to work on the skills necessary to get me to this conversation I'm having with you today, where I have no doubts whatsoever about what I do and what I bring to the world and the strength that I bring with it. But that's the confidence that comes only by repeating again and again, yes, I'm an attorney. Yes, I'm a writer. Yes, I am whatever it is that I do, and I'm damn proud of it.
And that's so good. Let's pick up on that, because what we can do with all these people in the chat room and everyone listening on this show and your expertise, Jacqueline, is we can now that we've expressed the issues and we've experienced them together, sharing that many of us feel this way, we can move forward by encouraging each other, even in just a few minutes that we have left on this show, to start saying those things to ourselves. Because once I started going to the cocktail parties and people asked me what I did, I'm an attorney at such and such a company, and this is what I do. And I was like, everybody just moved on. The earth didn't come, shaking, and nobody said anything. It was just me sharing who I was. So, and those little things that we do as indie business owners, when you get that new spa account, or when you get that new, that blog gets launched and someone leaves a wonderful comment there that says good things about what you're doing, those things build on each other, don't they, Jacqueline? And over time, what you find yourself able to do is to put yourself out there and become the person that's fully blooming. Is that what we can encourage each other to do?
Absolutely. Women need to support each other. We talk about women being competitive and not really wanting to support each other. That's not true. I think women are wonderful supporters for one another because, frankly, we all know what it looks and feels like We've all been in that place at some time or another. Even the highly successful ones, if you dig beneath the surface, you're going to find their insecurities. So yes, the earth didn't fall in when you said, yeah, I'm an attorney at, and they accepted that that was your definition of who you are, because other people are suffering the same thing. You know, if I say I am, then maybe they're going to think less of me, or maybe they're going to think, yeah, right. But that's presuming that they know something about you that you don't know, or they're somehow picking up on information that's not being released. It's as I said earlier, it's the yada yada radio. It's on 24/7, and we need to learn how to change the channel, because it really is all about change your language and you change your life. And changing your language is how you speak to yourself and how you present yourself to the world, because the earth isn't going to fall apart under your feet.
And you know, we've got a gentleman in our chat room today, too, and he's been generous enough to share a statement. He says, because this goes back to when we were talking about how women or girls might be raised differently from men, he says, I think guys are expected to be driven and successful. It has only been through acceptance of my own skills and gifts that I have been able to really use those skills to become successful. And what that seems to indicate is that while boys may be raised differently from girls, everyone struggles with this, because what he says is he also had to accept his own personal skills and gifts before he could move on and use them to their fullest potential. And I want to thank him for sharing that. We love you for sharing your thoughts there. And believe it or not, we are coming up on our last break. And Jacqueline, when we come back, I want to share with you some of the wonderful things, the self-proclamations that these people are making in the chat room. We're going to talk about that when we come back. This is Indie Business Radio. I'm your host, Donna Maria. We're talking with Jacqueline, and she is really inspiring people here, and we'll be right back.
Want to stay on top of what's new in the radio industry? Sign up for a free subscription to the Future of Talk Radio, available exclusively to listeners of globaltalkradio.com, and find out what's new in the world of online radio. Listeners can find out about new shows and special guests. People with something special to offer can find out how to become a guest and how to prepare for an interview. And prospective hosts will find a valuable resource for everything from planning a new program to selecting topics and guests, recouping expenses by selling advertising, and more. Sign up today for your free subscription to the Future of Talk Radio by visiting www.globaltalkradio.com and learn about the future of talk radio today.
Welcome back to Indie Business Radio. We're talking today with Jacqueline Wales, the author of The Fearless Factor, and we are having such a great time encouraging one another. And Jacqueline, before we took our break, the chat room lit up once again when you started talking about how it's other people's problem if they don't accept who we are. And we talked during our break, and I want to share this with our listeners, about the difference between identifying yourself as, for example, a soap maker versus the president or the CEO of Belladonna Soap Company in Charlotte, North Carolina. What are some of the mental differences between those two statements?
Well, the biggest statement is that you can be a soap maker, but if you're the CEO and founder of a soap manufacturing company, you've automatically elevated yourself to something of significance. It's about status.
Yes, it's not that you didn't have that at first. It's just it's okay to say that.
That's exactly it. When I called myself a CEO and founder of Fearless 50s, the first time I did that, I started to laugh. I said, how funny. I don't have a board. I don't have fancy offices in Manhattan. I don't have any of the trappings that would normally go with that kind of a title. But yet, I've had the experience to be able to create all of this, and that's exactly what I am. I am the CEO. You're the CEO of your household. Let's face it. all the different things that we have to do on a regular basis as women particularly to run our household, to make sure that the kids are all taken care of, to make sure that the social calendar is taken care of, all the appointments are met, so on and so forth. These extraordinary details add up to you are the CEO and founder of your company. So it's all about the identification with the label. As we said earlier, being allowed to say, I'm an attorney, I'm a writer, I'm a speaker. Whatever the case may be, we can't get caught up in the labels because you are entitled to call yourself whatever you wanted to call yourself. You want to call yourself Superwoman, go for it, because truly, most women are superwomen.
Right, absolutely. And, of course, labels are very problematic for a lot of reasons. But one of the things it seems to me that we do to ourselves by choosing not to use a label that fully expresses our leadership capabilities in these companies that we're running is forget about calling it a label. The fact of the matter is you are the chief executive person at that company. And people know what that means. And so when we don't say that, when we don't deliver that, if that's in fact what we are, then we're not fully expressing in a business context that segment of our lives.
It's absolutely true. And Marianne Williamson had a great quote, which is in my book, and I can't quote it verbatim at this moment, but it's around the idea of who are we to not play large.
Yes, I remember that.
And it's really an extraordinary quote. And the first time I heard it, I cried because I realized that by keeping myself small, which is what she mentions in this piece, by keeping yourself small, you deny the world your presence. And in denying the world your presence, what does that serve you?
Right.
It doesn't. It doesn't. And it doesn't serve the world. And ultimately, if we're getting back to this idea of being of service again, we all want to have some meaning and purpose in life. We want to be able to give back some of the stuff that we've acquired or just give a sense of meaning, shall we say. So it really is about what can you bring, and don't hold back on it, because when you do deny the world and deny yourself, a little bit is getting kind of chipped away. And truly, do we want to get to our deathbed wishing that we had been a little bit more bold, a little bit more daring, instead of fool out loud? Marcel Proust said it well. He said, if you ask me why I came here, I will tell you, I came to live out loud. And when I heard that one, I went, yes, I came to live out loud.
Mm-hmm.
Because living quietly doesn't serve anything. And that ultimately is not what you want. Every single woman who's in business for herself has come in with a sense of a mission, has come in with, I have something to contribute.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, the other side of that is I want to get something back, i.e. I want to make some money, and I want some status around this. As a homemaker, I hated having to say to people, I'm just a housewife.
Mm.
Completely doing away with the fact that just being a housewife and a mother was a full-time, 24-hour job that demanded a great deal of skills. And many people come to me who are in midlife who said, I've raised my kids and now I want to do something else, but I just don't know what that's going to be. And then we sit and we brainstorm about what they're passionate about, what they really used to dream about creating, and what is getting in the way of them doing that right now when all the barriers are away, when the kids are grown, or when there's, maybe even the relationships come to an end because there's no point in keeping it going because it was only there for the kids, and that happens a great deal in midlife too. So it's about really stepping into what is it for me? What do I want?
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, is, again, when you start your own business, it's all about what I want.
Mm-hmm.
And I can share another story with that. When I started Fearless 50s, I said to my husband, I want to do this, and it's going to cost some money. And he said, well, we'll have to talk about it. And I said, well, okay. And for a month, I went back and forth about, is this a good idea, and it's really going to cost a lot of money, and yay. And finally, he came into my office one afternoon, and I in that moment, I got completely focused and clear, and I told him why I was doing what I was doing and what I hoped to get out of it, and why there was no more decision to be made. I'd already made my decision, and he went out the room saying, well, I'll have to think about it. And I said, well, you think about it. I've already thought about it, and I'm really clear. And so off he went, and the next morning he came back and he said, I've had a think about it, and I see no option but to support you because you're my partner. And I said, well, how about we take the words no option out of that particular sentence, and we've got a deal. You support me because I'm your partner. End of story. And so it became. And he is now one of my strongest supporters in everything that I'm doing. But this was stepping off a cliff for me.
Right.
I thought, what are you doing? But I knew I had to do this. And that's what women do when they start their own businesses. I'm sure, Donna Maria, you went through it yourself. I'm going to step off a cliff here, and I'm going to see what happens.
Well, and it's funny because I think if you start a business, you're stepping off a new cliff all the time because there's always something new. There's a new way to get the word out about your products or whatever the case may be. So it's a constant stepping off of the cliff even after you've been in business for a while. But something from your book also made me think, too, Jacqueline, and that is the section where you talk about singing without any background music. And I know your story was literally, since you are a singer, you were singing and there was no background music, and you talked about the fear associated with that. But that caused me to think about an indie business owner, particularly when you first start out. You are making products, you are updating your website, you are blogging, you are doing all of these things, and you're doing them with no background music. In other words, there are no customers yet. There have been no successful trade shows where people have said how wonderful your products are. And so it does take some courage, does it not, to overcome the fear and the uncertainty associated with getting started when you don't even know what the feedback's going to be.
Absolutely. It takes enormous courage, enormous strength to be able to say, yes, I'm doing this, which is another reason why don't play small after you've taken the risks that you've taken. And here's my acronym for RISK, is to respect your intention and show courage.
Well, and I want you to repeat the other thing, too. Don't play small after you've taken the risk. Are you saying that we need to always remember that we are sacrificing quite a bit to have our businesses? We are taking a significant risk, although having a traditional job is also a significant risk, especially these days. But we are doing extraordinary things that deserve to be elevated to the level that, gives them the importance that they deserve.
No question, no question. I mean, most people, if they really knew what they were getting into when they started their own business, they would head in the other direction and say, you're out of your mind. But
and the thing, too, is that even when, as an indie business owner, when you work with these people all the time, when you start, you are so capable of so many great things that we ourselves pull away from ourselves just by, as you said, playing small after we've taken the risk.
Absolutely. I mean, if you sit down and you really make a list of all your skills and your experience and so forth, I have an interesting exercise that I do in my workshop, and I tell people to do a list of all your successes and all your failures. Because people get hung up on their mistakes. They get hung up on, well, it didn't work in the past, so it may not work in the future. Again, that time and thought issue as far as fear is concerned. But the interesting thing is your success column is always going to be longer than your failure column. Simply because a lot of the failures get kind of lost in the fabric of life. We forget about them. But we do remember the things that we've succeeded in. And there's no question in my mind that if you've taken on the task of starting a business, you have taken on something huge, and the amount of strength and courage it needed to go there is phenomenal. And even if that business didn't quite make it, you've still exhibited enormous strength and courage in order to create that, and then take it and say, what's next? Because here's the thing I say about making mistakes or failures. There's only one word for it, and that word is next. Because that's what we do as business owners. We just keep moving ahead. It's moving forward. We call it failing forward, and I love that, failing your way towards success. Because truly that's where we have our biggest lessons, and it's the biggest strength. Because I have this program called the 10 Healthy Habits of Fun, Fearless People, and the first habit is the road to a powerful future is a rocky past. And what I say there is you have this extraordinary strength that allowed you to get to where you are today, and use that strength to propel you into whatever it is that you want next. So do not play small with this, because it's like taking several steps backwards. You've got to bring all of that powerful energy with you, and as you keep going forward, it just keeps accumulating. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And that's not saying that your ego's getting out of control. What it is you're getting more connected to who you are, what you are capable of doing, and what it is that you bring to the world. And that's your position of power. That's the place that sits in your belly. And, I can't emphasize that enough, that we all have it. Not one of us is any weaker than the other unless we choose to be there.
And I think when you talk about being in a position of power, one of the things that is fearful for many is because we have watched so many people abuse their power, whether it's personally or professionally or politically, whatever you call it, we have seen it happen so many times, and particularly in the business world, we have seen it happen so many times that we become, I think, sometimes maybe conditioned to not want to fully express our power for fear of having it be perceived as something that is going to be hurtful either in the short term or the long term.
Absolutely, and I think this is, there's a lot of corruption out there, and there's a lot of people who are moving from a very ego-centered position. But when you come out of a place of integrity, when you come out of a place of authenticity, and you can stand in that, and I believe that our President Obama is that kind of a person, then there's no question that you can have the highest power in the land, but you can know that at base there's a really decent human being here. Someone who cares deeply about the effect of what it is that they bring into the world. And that's the difference between the people who use their power to corrupt, who use their power for greed, who use their power to manipulate other people. And for those of us, I like to think of myself as one of these people who come forward into the world saying, this is what I have to offer. It is valuable, it is on purpose, and it has some meaning to those whose lives I touch. And that's nothing to do with corruption. It has nothing to do with manipulation. It is simply an honest delivery of who you are and what it is that you're bringing into the world.
And here's a really good question about from the gentleman in the room, and I know other people have this question too, and I think it's a really good one. Why do we need to hide that we are small? Small is great. And I don't think, when I ask the question, if I may explain, I don't mean small in a physical sense or in a profit margin sense. I mean small in our head. Because a lot of times when people say they're a small business, they're not thinking about being small in the sense that they only have a few employees or their profit margin is not in the bazillions. But in their head, they're thinking small. In other words, they are positioning themselves not to pursue lofty goals or bigger goals. And I don't mean financially bigger goals, but I just mean propelling the business forward. That's what I mean when I say small. Is that what you mean as well, Jacqueline?
Absolutely, it's what I mean. It's a mental game. It's
right.
Completely a head game.
It's of thinking, not in terms of size.
Yeah, it's all about thinking, and that's why I say don't think small. Think big, because when you think big, we've all heard about the laws of attraction and so forth. The world isn't made from limitation. The world has extraordinary amounts of everything to offer. And we, as the individuals who operate within the structure of all of this, we can have as much or as little as we want. So if you choose to play small and you choose not to have a lot and you're perfectly happy with that, and I mean happy, not just putting up with it, then that's great. But I always believe that we need to think bigger. We need to think beyond the narrow confines of where we are right now in our so-called comfort zone, because it's only when we push ourselves and face that fear, that discomfort, that sense of the unknown, which always comes when you're kind of standing there between one place and another, not knowing which way to go, giving yourself the kind of boost to know that the vision you have is big. The vision you have is out there. I want a best-selling book, and I am absolutely convinced I'm going to get it because I know I'm a good writer. Now, I couldn't have said that 10 years ago,
Right, and that doesn't mean that you will not still be a small business. What it means is that your thinking is big. As someone described Elizabeth Hill at Handmade at Homestead, she says, "I'm proud to be a small business. It's just when my thinking stays small that it's bad for me."
Absolutely, and there's nothing wrong with small business. Small businesses. In fact, Obama mentioned it in his speech the other night. There, it's entrepreneurs who are going to turn this country around.
Yeah, and I think we've got a bunch of them in this chat room here, and you on the phone as well here as we're talking on Indie Business Radio. So we had one more question. We have time for one more, and then we're going to wrap up. And I'd like for Jacqueline to share some information about how we can learn more about her and her books. But the one thing that all of us are dealing with now is a shaken economy. And so one person in the chat room asked this question. Now, when we're asked how our business is doing in this economy, it may not always be so great. How can we respond from a position of strength, a position of being excited about the future, and not from a position of fear, and still be honest?
Well, I like to say at the moment, this is going to be my best year yet. Now, financially, I don't have the proof of that at this stage of the game.
Okay.
But I'm convinced that this will be my best year yet. And whether it's going to be my best year financially or just my best year in terms of getting through the year and feeling really good about everything I've done at the end of the year, then that's what it is. But I always say, you're doing fine. How are you doing? If you get into the complaints and you start going into the negatives, then guess what? It's kind of, you get more of the same. But even if you can sit there and say, hey, for this moment, I'm doing just fine. Because that's the other thing. If we're sitting with our view on the future, it's like, well, 5 years from now I could be completely broke. Like many people last year, I lost a chunk of my savings. And it put us in a very precarious position. But I chose not to dwell on that. I made a choice that for this moment, I still have a roof over my head, I still have food on the table, and I can still more or less carry on my life the way it's always been carried on. Minus a few bits and pieces that, used to be part of my life and will be again, but not for now. And that is really the position. You're fine for now.
Yeah, and I love that you're saying that, and I hope that that's helpful to the person that asked the question. It certainly is to me. Jacqueline, we are just about out of time. Tell us how we can get in touch with you to learn more about your products and services.
Well, thank you. If you go to www.thefearlessfactor.com, it's my brand new website, just got it up over this last weekend, and if you sign up, there is an e-course on there on the 4 easy steps to overcoming your fears today, so that you can live your best life now. And I'm also offering on my site a free 30-minute consultation with me that allows you to come in and talk about what's going on and what kind of guidance are you looking for to keep you moving forward.
Great. And what's the deadline for that?
The deadline is open for the next month, so I'm very happy to share this with your listeners, and please, come on in and take full advantage of this because there's some really great stuff there.
Great. Till the end of March, thefearlessfactor.com. Take the e-course and get 30 minutes of free consultation. We love it. Jacqueline Wales, thank you so much for joining us today on Indie Business Radio. I'll see you guys next week. Thank you for joining me in the chat room. This was so much fun. Next week, right here on Indie Business Radio. In the meantime, enjoy your life, build your business, and have your way.
You're listening to GlobalTalkRadio.com.